Are we even streaming? I don't know. I got an error there for a second that said we weren't streaming. Are we here? Are we here? Ah, crap. Just want to make sure um that we are. Are we even streaming? I don't know. I got an error there for a second that said we weren't. All right. Well, apparently from my feedback, are we here? We are streaming. So we are here. Thank you, thank you. I hope it's feel like vintage stuff. It's true that uh me messing up the beginning of the stream is pretty classic. Um so I wanted to talk about real quick because people bring this up a bit about Dorne and Spain and Dorne being a stand-in for Spain and things like that. And uh, I understand the immediate go there idea, especially when looking at Game of Thrones, which specifically stylized Dorne after um, Andalusian Spain. However, if we're actually going with the book, what I'm going to say, like, is Dorne Spain? The answer is not really. It's very, very, very loose. And there's so many things wrong about that portrayal that it kind of bugs me, which is one of the reasons like I'm bringing this up. Dragon Demands mentions that Dorne is Wales. There's actually George R. R. Martin, when the people ask him about Dorne, he actually says that Dorne is more based on Wales and Palestine than it is on Spain, but there's elements of Moorish Spain in there. And that it's the elements of Wales have to do with the fact that like Wales was kind of this rebellious area of the British Isles, and it eventually is reunified with England through marriage, and that the title of Prince of Wales was maintained. Yeah. So in that sense, like Dorne is Wales. When George says Palestine, I don't really get it. Like, I don't really like, and I want to talk about specifically like Spain and why people think Dorne is Spain and what they're right and wrong about this kind of idea. So here is Spain, and when people talk about like Moorish Spain, okay, they're like, well, southern Spain is hot, Dorne is hot, so therefore there's similarities. And you're like, okay, well, a lot of places are hot. Southern Spain isn't that hot. There's not deserts in southern Spain. Like it's not like this desert area of Dorne. It's just not to that degree. Now I understand people go, oh, Moorish Spain, those are Arabs. Arabs live in the desert because they all of a sudden get this idea of Saudi Arabia and like Bedouins or something. And it's like, if you're making that connection, like Arab Spain, Arab desert, Dorne desert, you kind of get there through this chain as if like Arabs only live in the desert. So brief history, obviously, like Spain was originally inhabited by some Iberian people. They were invaded by the Celts. There was communication with the Greeks. They were invaded by the Carthaginians. They were then invaded by the Romans. Then the Vandals came in. This is where we start getting into the medieval period. The Vandals come in and rule Spain, and then the Moorish conquest comes up, gets a little past Barcelona, takes most of Spain and Portugal, and then we enter a period that is a little bit disputed with historians. We either talk about it as terms of the Reconquista or the Convivencia period. Both descriptions of that period are a little overstated. It was not this like Christians versus Muslims like duality where they're just like fighting in this respect. It was also not exactly a coexistence period. So you actually had Christians and Muslims teaming up, fighting other Christians and Muslims, Christians fighting Christians, Muslims fighting Muslims. It was a big old mess. But, in a simplistic sense, we think of it as the Reconquista Convivencia period. Okay, that goes until 1492 with the conquest of of Granada. Spanish history is very easy to remember with regards to dates, because 711 is when the Moorish came in, and 1492 is when they were gone. And then in 1492, Isabel and Ferdinand, they that's the queen of Castile and Leon, marries the king of Aragon. They go down, they kick the Andalusians out of Granada, and we have the unification of Spain myth. And then after that, there is a period of forced assimilation where they try to get people to un-Arabize. That goes for a period of time, and this is often, assimilation is also part of Spanish history. People talk about the Spanish Inquisition and when it began and when it ended, and people don't really know and what that entailed, because it was both the religious and linguistic and even food related assimilation period of always trying to get people to assimilate to what is Spanish and never knowing what Spanish is. And then we get to the modern period, and every piece of Spain thinks they're independent and that there is no Spain. So let's compare that to Dorne. Okay. Dornish history has the first men and then the Andals. Historically speaking, it's not really very similar to anything we have. Yes, you could say like, oh, the Andal invasion is like the Vandal invasion, but not really, because the Vandals are coming in and taking down the Roman Empire. There's this like civilized, you're going from the civilized Romans to the Germanic barbarians coming in and tearing everything down, and then building, Gothic Christian churches. But the Romans were Christian before that, so you're not getting the same sort of like Andal invasion kind of comparison at all. So it doesn't really apply. Then we're talking about like there is a continuous Reconquista. The Reconquista period starts in like 10 something, but for like more than 400 years, you're just having constant war in Spain to retake territory. None of that is similar to Dorne at all. Like the Numeria's ships arrive, and this is mostly like a refugee movement. She marries into the Martell family, and then they just essentially there's some brief wars, and then they have Dorne. And Dorne's borders are pretty stable. You have no Portugal rivalry, anything similar to that in Dorne. Unless you want to say like, if you want to invent something in your head about Starfall, that would be interesting and all, but it's not really in the text, that maybe there was this rivalry between Starfall and Sunspear, maybe, but it's not really supported in the text. And then, so this idea of like the Dornish marches, for example, being this border between the Seven Kingdoms and having forts and constant wars and skirmishes between like the borders of the Seven Kingdoms, it doesn't apply to Spain at all, because Spain's Reconquista border was continuously moving south, and it's just, we don't have anything similar in history. So I would say that like historically speaking, Spain and Dorne have nothing in common. Now, the thing that people go to the most when they talk about it, when they talk about the Dornish Spanish similarities, is they'll go, oh, the ethnic thing, because like southern Spain has like dark Moorish people, and Dorne has some dark people, and for the most part, that's overstated about Spain. Like, yeah, if you put people in a hot, sunny climate, they get dark. And the Moorish invasion, like Moors were not that dark to start with. So like Berbers are darker, but like Moors are, the Arabs of Morocco, like were not that dark, because, the Carthaginians, the northern Africa was settled by Phoenicians, which was the Carthaginians. And then those Carthaginians kind of become like modern day, what we think of modern day Arabs in that area. But they're not that dark to start with. And so they invade Spain. And if you go to Spain, like people are pretty diverse looking. There's blondes, there's people that are dark. Yeah, you can generally say that in the South, they're darker than in the North, and they have blacker hair. Sure. but a lot of that is the fact that it's sunny in the south. But nonetheless, in Dorne we get like there's this big like like swarthy Dornishman like statement. But the thing is, if we compare that to Europe, Southern French and Italians have a similar look, or Greeks, and so you wouldn't have that same sort of like racial divide with the Spanish and the rest of Europe as, say, like the Dornish and the rest of Europe, because lots of Europe looks like Spaniards. So it's a bit weird where the people immediately jump to the ethnic thing, like the racial thing, like as if Spanish looked that different from Italians, like no one sits there and goes, oh, well, Dorne is Italy. Well, because of ethnic differences. Like, and so then we talk about like ethnic differences. I always think the word ethnic is kind of funny because like we say like a difference is like a difference, like all ethnicity is a difference between two peoples. So if you have an ethnic difference between two peoples, like that's just a difference between two peoples. So it's kind of redundant to say ethnic difference, but like, because ethnicity can be anything, any cultural aspect, whether, linguistic or whatever. So the ethnic difference between the Andalusians and the rest of Spain was more linguistic and religious. And we don't have that difference in Ice and Fire. Everyone in Dorne speaks the common tongue, and everyone in Dorne is a follower of the faith of the Seven. So we're not even getting like the Muslim Christian difference. To say nothing of the fact that there's no stand-in for Jews in Ice and Fire, and the Jews are like an enormous part of medieval history in Spain. Like, but nonetheless, like we don't have like a religious difference between Dornish and the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. So there's no like Muslim, Jew, Christian thing. Now you could say like, oh, but they worship some like turtles or something, and you're like, well, it's very, very loose. You could say that like after the conquest, during the assimilation period of trying to get Muslims to convert and like forcing them to eat pork and stuff, that there were secret Muslims everywhere, which was a fear in Spain in the 1500s. But like it just doesn't really apply to Dorne. The other thing, food, completely different. Like, Spanish food is known for like olives and seafood. Dornish food is snakes and spicy stuff. Like, and it's seen as something they don't want to eat. Well, meanwhile, Spanish food and what the Arab conquest brought and the Moorish conquest brought was actually things that people really wanted to eat. It was things like sugar and spices. 20% of like the Spanish language is actually from Arab words. I mean, that doesn't really represent like what you use every day, but like, sugar comes from Arabic, like sukar, asukar, and things like that. So there's just not much different. Like, so we're saying like historically, geography, racially, religiously, there's just freaking nothing. And even when you talk about something like, well, what about, and not to mention the fact that Spain was always a huge fucking power. Like historically they rocked. They had a huge navy. They were a world power. They're conquering right and left. Like they had this rivalry with Portugal. Like Dorne is always kind of this like, shitty little land of rebels, like that doesn't really have that huge of an army. Like, so there's so far we're getting almost nothing with regards to like similarity to Spain. Now, I will say that there is a slight thing when we talk about like fountain culture and like water. So there's the water gardens in Dorne, and the Andalusians were into fountains. And this comes from two things. Is one, if you come from an area that doesn't have very much water, like water is now this like sign of wealth. And two, there's like ablution for Islam. You have to ablute 5 times a day and things like that before your prayer. Though there's something called dry ablution, so it's not really necessary, but nonetheless, fountain culture. And water. But even that, like, the water in Dorne is mostly through wells and the river, while like the Moors used cisterns and aqueducts, and it was like a wholly different kind of like system that we see. And you're like, well, water is important. Well, water is important everywhere. Like I don't like it's not really like a Dornish Spanish thing. Like Spain is not like this land of like deserts where everyone's like part. There's mountains all over that like kind of like flow down into things. So we have very, very, very little differences like between real Spain and Dorne. Like I would say that the ethnic differences are not similar. The historical differences are not similar. The geography and climate are not similar. The big thing, the religion, not similar. The one thing, like maybe you get fountain culture, you get fountains, but there's one thing that where the Spanish kind of aspect goes. And keep in mind, George R. R. Martin is like a reader. And keep in mind, George R. R. Martin never really claimed this. And in fact, a lot of the river stuff with the green blood and stuff, it describes Egypt more than anything. But and then coming from like river versus desert cultures and the importance of oases and things like that. But if we're really talking about a similarity between where Spain enters into the Dornish story, it's almost exclusively centered around the poem of El Cid. So El Cid was a medieval epic poem that is very, very important to Spain, and it is their national epic poem. If you're going to know anything about Spanish history and Spanish ideology, like how Spanish people think, you need to read the poem of El Cid because it tells a lot about like their myths and how they view the world. And so in the poem of El Cid is a character who is unjustly exiled. He's unjustly and so because he's unjustly exiled, he needs to get his honor back. And so he goes and fights the Moors for many years to regain his honor. Now, this is, of course, the story of Oberyn Martell, who's unjustly exiled and then decides to fight for many years. The difference is that like El Cid actually regains his honor and regains the trust of the king and returns. And he marries his daughters are married off to some princes. They're abused, and so which we're thinking about the abuse of Elia Martell. That's to an extreme, but the daughters are abused. So El Cid has to fight a duel to as revenge. If we think about Oberyn Martell's history, he has duels. He has the duel against the Mountain at the end, and which leads to his death. El Cid wins. His daughters are remarried to new princes, and they become like the queens of Navarra and like Aragon. And then there's a reunification of Spain with like this in the story. And so like you can kind of see, okay, there's some marriages for reunification in the story here of maybe we could talk about like Tristan or something, or you see the elements like the exile, the war, the duel. El Cid is very focused on justice and revenge for like the mistreatment of his daughters, and then kind of marriages and a reunification. So if there's any element to Dorne being Spain, it's the poem of El Cid, which is something that George R. R. Martin, probably being a reader who didn't go anywhere, he read that, but like when we're actually talking about anything with regards to like any other aspect of Spain, almost none, no similarity between Spain and Dorne. And so I'd almost like to say that like I'd like to like almost dispel this rumor, because George R. R. Martin doesn't go around claiming it too much. He actually does say that like he thought about Wales and Palestine more. But anyway, nonetheless, that is my rant on Spain and Dorne. Okay, let's get into some other discussion. And the Welsh are so hot-blooded, yes. um, is the Westerlands is the best place in the Song of Ice and Fire? We can only assume that based on. I mean, we haven't really spent much time in the Westerlands. Uh, I'm trying to think of like. I mean, I would rather live in Dorne. I mean, just because you've got things like it's more egalitarian, and the women are looser. That idea. Uh, so I like spicy food. I like the sunshine. So I might be more into Dorne myself. But I guess that's the other thing that people might think about is like the sexualization of like Arabs versus like the sexualization of Dorne. The problem again is that like people didn't necessarily have that idea about like Andalusia. Like the sexualization of the Arab world largely comes from A Thousand and One Arabian Nights, which is Iraqi. It's in the Iraq area. In fact, in that story, Andalusia and Morocco are seen as far off exotic places. The story of Aladdin is about, uh, uh, so the characters are like there's a character from China and there's a character from Morocco, and the idea is that like we're taking the most far off exotic places that they know of and bringing them together. Um, but yeah, I think I'd rather live in Dorne myself. I mean, geez, just uh, um, do you think Aegon the Second surviving Dragonfire will be a big thing in the show? Yes, we're jumping to House of the Dragon here. I think absolutely. The thing is, House of the Dragon right now is trying to go for as much shock and titillation as possible. Um, they even with what's described in um I mean, I'm trying to think like in Fire and Blood, I suppose the mushroom stories are a little more, I wouldn't say like they're a little more graphic than what we saw. I mean, yeah, we saw an orgy going on in the background, but we didn't actually get to see like Rhaenyra uh you know giving head to Mushroom and Damon on rocks. Um but for other than that, like yeah, they try to make the show as violent as possible, ramping things up to 11 when we think about like the violence of on Monmouth, or the dragon busting through the floor, or the wars and the stepstones. Everything has to be like graphic. So when you talk about like Aegon the Second getting burned and spending all of this time like surviving his burns, and then returning and being this like mutilated character. I mean, come on, that's all good television right there, right? Like you got to think about it in that sense. Um, the um, just have this message here that says like the Inquisition. I guess the song. Every time I talk about the Inquisition, people's knowledge of the Inquisition is really weird, because the Inquisition is like this very loose thing that no one really knows when started or what it included, or some people claim it never existed and stuff like that. Um, Aragorn, what a terrible sci-fi fantasy name. It's true. Aragon, yes. It's strangely enough like the term like Aragon, the region of Spain has somehow become the most reused, and Aragon and Aragorn has somehow become one of the most reused uh, names. And so it seems to appear like all over in sci-fi and fantasy. Like, isn't there a? Oh, right. Like not only is there Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, there's Aragon spelled with an E, which is an entire book series of for dragons and such. But yeah, it's just so many things are named Aragon. It just sounds like so noble and and fantasy-esque. The King of Aragon. Well, some other places don't sound so great. You know, um, no one's like, no one's ever like Leon. It just means lion. Like, okay, castle, Castile. Being from Castle and Lion. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. If Dorne is Spain, the taxes are awful. Fair enough. Is there massive youth unemployment? Did they go for what about the Status Inquisition? Oh my goodness! All of these poems, all of these puns. No one expects the Dornish master plan. Hispania is better than Portugal. I would disagree, and I love Spain. Keep in mind, I love Spain. But if you want a place that's like even chiller and cheaper and just more Spanish than Spanish, it's Portugal. It's like Spain. So one of the problems with Spain is it's got a little expensive, especially Barcelona, which used to be a rockin' city and is now just so she and filled with boutique stores now. But you can go to, if you go to Lisbon, Lisbon is just so, it's still like of the people. It's still a place you can cheaply go out and just, have a great huge seafood dinner and drinks, and it costs you nothing. And the Portuguese are really chill. And so I enjoy Portugal quite a bit. A lot of the Moors were redheads in the paintings, even. Oh, exactly. And this is the problem, is that like when people otherize Arab, like Arab is a term that is a linguistic family. Okay, so and it's a very loose linguistic family. It's like calling people Romance, like comparing Romanian and French and Portuguese as languages and being like, you're all Romance. You're just a Romance people. I mean, that is the equivalent of Arab. Now it goes a bit further because there was Nasser and these ideas of Arab nationalism and stuff like this. It goes a little bit further, and the invention of modern standard Arabic as like a Latin stand-in and things like this. Like don't get me wrong, like Arabs also fall into this idea that there's a unified Arab people, but it's the equivalent of like saying the Romance people. Yeah, there's tons of redheaded Arabs, like especially if you go to Syria, but like, people get this idea of Arab and they go to Saudi Arabia and they think of like Bedouin, like, walking across the planet of Arrakis with no water anywhere. And you're like, come on, like this is to say nothing of places like Lebanon or Algeria that have like huge green forests, or so it's a very funny thing. There's blonde Arabs, there's black Arabs, there's everything, because it's a language family. So it's very silly. The sea people, maybe. Yeah, sea people were mysterious, but a lot of say they settled in like low in southern Palestine, the ones that were kind of left over. I mean, who knows about all of the sea peoples and where they ended up. There's a rivalry between Sunspear and Ironwood, and the Ironwoods must have been disloyal and wanted to be free of the Martell yoke. Yeah, there's definitely that. A rivalry between Ironwood and Martell, and obviously like in the story we're supposed to think about it in a sense of Andal culture versus Roynish culture, and that there was this like and there's maybe a racial difference between the stony Dornish and the salty Dornish and things like this. We're supposed to like think about these sorts of aspects. But putting it in the Spanish mindset, like we don't have that idea. I mean, yeah, there like there's Christians who might be who might have a few more blonde, freckles, trying to take over Muslims, that might be a little darker. But the stand-in for, like, you know in Ice and Fire, it's about like succession and like like the importance of women, and things like this, and like which king they support, like a Blackfire versus Daron and stuff like that. It's so far, it's so distant that it gets kind of like ridiculous, the like comparing it to Spain anymore. Because in fact, like, the Christians that lived in Al Andalus were, for the most part, fairly well treated, and there were Muslims in the Christian areas that were living there, which is one of the things about the Reconquista that, like, is misleading, is that, like, the Reconquista line, like, there are Muslims living in Christian Spain, and there are Christians living in Muslim Spain. It was just that the leaders were mostly Christian, and the leaders were mostly Muslim. But this is why, like, people talk about convivencia, is that the people themselves, there was religious freedom, until Isabel and Ferdinand, and then the religious freedom ends. But this idea that there was this, like, during this Reconquista period, even though that there was constant war between the royals for supposed religious reasons, but often not for religious reasons, the people were living in a land of religious freedom, which was quite interesting. I mean, until reunification and in 1492. But, like, it's we just don't have that kind of, like, similarity, like, what over this, like, issue of, like, sex related succession, and, like, what exactly is it that the Ironwoods dislike about the Martells? Is just power, and, like, it's very, very loose, to the point where you could take almost any conflict and say, like, oh, like, the Ironwoods Martell, like, parallel this conflict. Well, okay. Is there any relationship between Greywater Watch and Greywater Station other than them being swamps? There's not much. So the Greywater Watch is named after a George R. R. Martin story called Men of Greywater Station, one of George R. R. Martin's very early sci-fi tales taking place in the Thousand Worlds universe. It details a group of humans who have conquered a planet in Findi space. We're in war with the Findi, and they're trying to win this war against the Findi. So they've established a biological engineering, like, research station. But the planet itself is ruled by is almost all conquered by a fungus that lives on all things and controls all things. In the sense that, like, it's kind of like The Last of Us, but the entire planet is covered in this fungus, and so this fungus begins sending false dreams and false visions and prophecies to the researchers, and the researchers start turning on each other and start going crazy and start getting paranoid, and then the research station, like, blows apart, and our protagonist is left sitting there in the ruins, at the end, presumably very close to death, So yeah, I mean, other than them being in swamps and using the term Greywater, like, I can't think of too many similarities. Like, I suppose there's a mysterious, if we're including Moat Cailin, where we've got a mysterious ruined advanced civilization, much like the ruined station at the end of Greywater Station. But, like, That's pretty far. Like it's just some big basalt blocks where we're just like, how did they build these basalt blocks, and where are they getting basalt in a swamp? Where's the volcano? Where's the volcanic stuff? Like, why are they bringing in giant blocks of basalt? So there's not much. A lot of people talk about Howl's Moving Castle as um, as a possible influence for Greywater Watch. So there was a 1986 fantasy novel by Diana Wynne Jones called Howl's Moving Castle. And so we talk about, him being Howland Reed and having a moving castle, that maybe it was somewhat based on this nominally. But like I say, when George R. R. Martin bases something on something else, it's like when I talk about Oberyn and the similarities to the poem of El Cid. Like, it's just, how much difference, how many similarities are there besides something on a very surface level. um it's Sophie learns that Howl, a rather self-absorbed and fickle and ultimately good-natured person, spreads malicious rumors about himself to avoid work and responsibility. Somewhat sounds like Howland Reed, but we might be reading into it. The door to his castle actually opens into 4 places. He has portals inside. When the king's brother goes missing, the king orders Howl to find them and kill the Witch of the Waste. But he wants to avoid the witch, and so So, I mean, if you want to read, try to read into it and be like, oh, maybe the witch is Lady Stoneheart. Or maybe Howl shirking responsibility is him not sending men to rob, but I don't know. But generally speaking, there's very little similarity between Men of Greywater Station and Greywater Watch. I can't really think of anything, and even going through the characters in that story and things like that, it's just not. Mel can't burn Shireen as she has blood of a dragon. Specific, what happens to the other Targaryen's lineage. Robert buried King's Landing. Rhaenys Mist then buried in Storm's End. Stefan at sea. Aemon, Beryl. Only Dragonfire Wildfire can burn a Targaryen. So you're saying this? Yeah, okay, I'm getting this. This is like saying that it takes something like this is under the theory that like Targaryens are fireproof. That it takes a very intense fire to actually burn them. And this is the idea that like Dany is fireproof, and that perhaps they were using dragons to incinerate bodies. And Arian Brightflame like burned himself with wildfire. So did Egg, and things like this. Egg doesn't seem to get sunburned when he's with Dunk traveling around. Doesn't mind the heat. I see all of this. But of course there is the fact that most of the Targaryens post the death of dragons, post the dance, were cremated. Their bodies were cremated with regular, good old wooden pyres. Viserys, died with a, gold on top of his head. Trying to think anything else like, just like obvious like fire burnage. Jon Snow, if we're accepting R plus A equals J, burns his hand pretty bad. Spends the entire story doing his Twitch. So there is the question of, and we do know that Quentin, whether he's alive or dead, we know that when he put his hand on the candle, he burned himself. So does Shireen have blood of the dragon, and will she be fireproof? I mean, I admit that would be pretty damn funny. That'd be pretty damn funny if they tried to burn Shireen and they came in and she was just alive in the end, same as Daenerys, and everyone is super confused. That would be pretty nuts. I admit that would be unexpected. Not a single fan. You might be the first fan expecting that she would be that she'd survive the pyre. The But we shall see. We shall see. I mean, for Dany, it seems like it was a one-time thing. The Targaryens are not fireproof, but there was some sort of one-time event at the pyre, and that she gets burned later with Drogon. And so I'm trying to think that like it's that Targaryens are just not fireproof in general. Let's see. Again, some twitching. What was George going for with the distinction between sandy, rocky, and salty Dornish? Is that inspired by real world history? So the closest thing that I can come up with regards to the differences between the Dornish have to do with the differences between Egyptians. And George R. R. Martin did write a story that takes place in Egypt in Wild Cards. And in this story, he does let me it's this one. Inside Straight. It's about, in case you ever want to read it, and it's about a reality show that takes place in Egypt, starring a bunch of superhero aces, not jokers, aces, because the superheroes in this universe are called aces. It's about a reality show being filmed in Egypt with aces who then have to fight a guy who's trying to come to power named the Jinn. It's whatever. It's I mean, if you're on a plane and you have nothing to do and it happens to be sitting there, fine. But I would never recommend it otherwise. But having read this story, in this story, George R. R. Martin does go off on a very long tangent for no reason. It has nothing to do with the story about the difference between the Black Earth and the Red Earth in Egypt. So, in Egyptian history, Egypt, we call Egypt because that's what the Romans called it. They called it Egyptus. And Arabs, they call it Misr. But for a long time, Egypt was actually called Kemet, which means the black land. And this was in opposition to the red land, so the idea is that if you're near the River Nile, the soil is so rich that it's black. And those are the black soil people. And then the people in the desert who live in oases and various things are the red soil people, the red. So in a sense, you've got these two different types of people, the red and the black. And so you could take it a bit further and say, okay, well, also besides that, there's going to be the ones up at Alexandria, the fishermen and stuff like that who live by the ocean. And so you've got these three different types of people. You've got the ones that are around the river, the ones that are around the sea, the ones that are in the desert. In this case, he's using mountains instead. And you see elements of this with the green blood, how like there's all these river people that are like on the river and the Rhine, coming from the Rhine, versus people in the desert that live around oases. I mean, like I say, like the geography of the story of Dorne more closely resembles Egypt, which strangely George, I don't even think George has ever mentioned Egypt when he's like described Dorne. He's mentioned Spain and Palestine and Wales, but I find the river thing more similar to Egypt. And George has written about Egypt and he's written about that difference. So I think he might be like, trying to take some sort of geographically based, racial or ethnic breakdown and apply it to Dorne. And the only one that really like fits with me is like this idea of Egypt. Now George himself also, like, because he lived in Duluth, he became really obsessed with the Mississippi River and river culture, which led to Fever Dream and things like this. And so he does, which when you talk about the Rhoyne and everything, and his whole description of the Rhoyne and Volantis is just the Mississippi River, because he's obsessed with this river culture. So I think he does kind of like think about that stuff from his time in Duluth, thinking about like rivermen, the Riverlands, the rivermen versus like everywhere else. I mean, keep in mind, in Fever Dream, he uses terms like rivermen. Like he's like, oh, the rivermen, So I think that's it. Like he's just in this mindset. He was in a mindset of like river versus not river cultures or something, and ethnicity being based on like your geography and stuff like that. And I mean, I guess some of that is even element. I mean, I guess that's kind of a trope in fantasy novels too, though, right? Like dwarves are in the mountains, and the elves are in the forests, and everything is related to the land and stuff like that. So it might be something like that too. Europe is prejudiced. They hate all non-Europeans. Isn't everybody prejudiced? I'm trying to think of anybody that's not prejudiced. I mean, there are aspects of Americans that are the most racist and the least racist. There are aspects of Europeans that are the most racist and the least racist. It all just depends on like what you're exposed to and what's important and things like that. But generally speaking, I would say that the more urban based and more exposed someone is to other cultures, you tend to get more tolerance than like people that are in rural areas where things are homogenous. So I would say that like exposure breeds acceptance, which is why, generally speaking, if you're in the middle of a rural area, you get the racist redneck trope, because they've never experienced the difference. And so, Jay, you find this in the Middle East too, like the Palestinians, for example, are more accepting and more liberal than the Bedouins, because they were in the cities and being merchants and exposed to everything versus like being in the middle of the desert where you're just around your own people and stuff like that. But Europeans, for the most part, it's a very urbanized, densely populated area. They're exposed to lots of different peoples now. So, Europe is on their way to being pretty open. That's my experience for the most part. Why does Stannis spare Mance? Why is he important? Well, I would argue that Stannis spares Mance because he thinks Mance can be useful, and that it was part of his deal with Val. So Mance very clearly wants Stannis from the beginning. This is no secret. Okay, Stannis talks about this very clearly. Stannis is rather open about his plans in the book. He goes north because he wants to use the wildlings as his army. he hears about 100,000 people, marching on the wall, and he's like, "Hey, that's an army I can use." And so he goes north to take that army. And so Val, his trick into trying to get them is to make Val the princess, have her be Lady of Winterfell, and marry whoever to her, and then like unify everybody because they'll look to Val as as their leader. So his plan is like, okay, I'm going to take Jon Snow. He's a Stark. You know, even the wildlings somewhat see themselves as Starks. And they're going to look at Val, his wife, and they're going to join Stannis's cause. And then they're all going to get not fiefs in the gift. And it's not a bad plan. Even though Jon Snow is like, that's stupid. You have no idea how it works, but it's not that bad of a plan. But Val probably insisted on Mance being spared, because Val instantly becomes a team player for Mance. She's like, I will marry whoever you want. So I would think that putting the pieces together, like the evidence of Val's complete submission to Stannis, or at least complete apparent submission to Stannis. She might be playing a secret game. But nonetheless, like, openly, she is very open to Stannis and plays ball so far. If she might have a secret agenda, we don't know it yet. But she argued for Mance to live, and so once Mance survived, then Stannis is gone by then. So it's Mel that sends him south. But the question is like, did Stannis know that Mance was going to be sent south in order to maybe provoke and allow the wildlings to come south? And this is an interesting thing, because it's like, did Stannis, if the pink letter is a Stannis Mance conspiracy, versus just a Mance thing, did Mance and Stannis know from the beginning that they were going to, have this incendiary letter to force the wildlings to come south, or to, I would actually say that that's probably going too far. Some people would argue that. In fact, I think Cantius argues that from the beginning, Stannis wanted the pink letter and conspired with Mance from the beginning in everything he did in order to get everything going. But I think the problem with like too much conspiracy is that Jon sends Val to go get Tormund's wildlings of his own volition. And I don't know if like at that point Stannis would know that happened. No, then again, Jon does tell Stannis that he's going to try to get them. So, it is what it is. So one could argue that there was a conspiracy and that Stannis wanted the wildlings to come south and be his army and be induced by incendiary language, rescuing Mance, things like this, their obligation to him. Or, some people would also argue that like when Stannis tells his plan to Jon, he's like, I'm going to marry Val to you and be a Lord of Winterfell. And Jon's like, yeah, that's a shitty plan. Stannis actually says, I know it is. Like, or around that. He's like, they're not going to follow her because she's a princess of Winterfell. They follow who's strong. And Stannis says, you don't think I know that? He actually says that. Which means that like, he knows that like Mance is the one that's going to be important all along, and that they're only going to follow Mance, and that he needs Mance. So he needs to send Mance south, have Mance get captured, and then have the wildling army come try to rescue him in order to like provoke them into action and unification. I mean, it's a lot of conspiracy. It'll be, it's a lot of forethought for George R. R. Martin. But it kind of makes sense if Stannis is the master planner and he's honest when he said, like, I know that no one's going to rally around Val, then it makes sense that he kept Mance alive in order to be part of that plan. So I'd say, like, the easy answer is, why did Stannis spare Mance? Because Val wanted him to. The harder answer is maybe he spared Mance because Mance was part of his master plan of getting the Wildling army to unify and fight for him. Theory: Jaehaerys II murdered his family at Summerhall because Duncan, who always wanted to be king, challenged for the throne again. Do you mean Aegon the Fifth murdered his family at Summerhall? I'm trying to think, like, Jaehaerys the. Let me think. I'm trying to think how old Jaehaerys was at the time. Maybe we'll talk about both of them then. This idea is that Jaehaerys, like, so. So the background of this situation is that so Egg is king at this point, and Sir Duncan the Small should be heir, but abdicates in order to marry Jenny of Oldstone. And so succession goes to Jaehaerys II, who had married his sister and stuff like this. And so, this idea that Jaehaerys, then this is this theory that, okay, in fact, even though Duncan abdicated, he regretted it or didn't truly abdicate and wanted to take the stuff back. And to prevent Duncan from being established as heir, Jaehaerys II murders his family in order to take the throne, so that Duncan wouldn't do that. I mean, this is just one of those situations where there's, like, not any information. This is not a provable or falsifiable theory. Like, so little is written on this that who's to say? I mean, did Duncan the Small, like, really regret it and wanted to be king again, or he'd when did he even marry Jenny of Oldstones? Do we even know when he met Jenny of Oldstones in, like, 239? I'm trying to think if he had children. Does it even say? This is how freaking, like, little and how, like, close to the chest George R. R. Martin is about Summerhall in this period. I don't even know if like Duncan the Small and Jenny have kids, which you'd think is, like, a big deal, right? Like, you're talking about all these, like, Targaryens running around trying to fulfill prophecy and bullshit, and he, like, finds this mysterious girl, Jenny of Oldstones, and thinks that, like, she's the perfect girl and needs to marry her. He needs to marry her. I mean, this is very fucking Rhaegar and Lyanna, right? Or this is very Aegon the Unworthy and, like, the Bracken and the Blackwood girls. Like, it's a Targaryen searching around for the right womb to shoot his load into, right? So you'd think we'd know if Duncan the Small was trying to birth a prophecy baby or whatever. So I mean, if Duncan Duncan if he had a prophecy baby and then he wanted to like retake the throne after everything, or he decided that he all of a sudden was on board with like um yeah, he could all of a sudden be selfish. I mean, it's all possible, but it's like there's nothing written in that. There's nothing written in that. So um oh man, I'm so behind. I'm still in people are still talking about Spain in my comments here. Um I like this. Haha, pro feminism because of loose women. I say this all the time. Feminism helps men. It helps men in every respect. Like in a self-interested sense, like feminism is great. Like, for men. Like you get smarter women who are much better to hang out with. Educated women, so much better to hang out with than uneducated women. And women that have sex, so much better than women that don't have sex. I mean, it's great. Like I don't like feminism it's fucking win-win. I don't get it. Like it's not like I'm sitting there with feminism being like, oh yeah, no, we need in some sort of charity sense. No, like it is like my support of feminism is purely like because like man, it's so much better. It's so much better, and you're like much happier men. like like who wants like traditional you know prudish uneducated woman, like man, that would suck. That would suck, man. Holy crap. Like because like I say, like dude, like I used to live in Jordan and Egypt, and I saw some of the most brutally oppressed women I've ever seen in my life, like just covered up, like complete niqab. And you go to the mall. The Middle East is filled with malls. But you go to the mall and you see these women like walking around the mall, and they can't even freaking use the escalator. They can't even use the escalator. They're freaking out. They're like, like no one's taking them to ride a fucking escalator. Like, when my kid was 2, he's hopping on and on the escalator, running up and down. But these women have been kept inside and maleducated and like kept from the world so long that they can't even ride an escalator and are scared to fucking death of it. It's like, do you want to hang out with that? Do you want to hang out with somebody that can't use the fucking escalator? Anyway, Jamie first calls Kat not so fair maiden, and then says Peter was her first. Twice she doesn't deny it. Also, always thought she or Brienne raped Jamie after he said he'd only been with Cersei. Oof, there's a weird one. Look, I don't think Catelyn is. I don't think Catelyn and Brienne are doing that to Jamie in his. I think it kind of takes away the purpose and theme of the entire story there. I mean, the whole thing is that like Cat is holier than thou, and if there's anything about Cat's character, as for like not denying like that Peter was her first, she clearly thinks in her own head that Ned was her first. Like she thinks about Ned being her first time, like in her point of view. It is so for her to not deny anything to Jamie. It's more that she's not dignifying it with a response. It's just like such a ridiculous thing. Like, what are you talking about? You're just assuming something that's just wrong. Like in a Game of Thrones, she thinks about Ned and their first time, and it being the first time she's had sex with some weird stranger. So she definitely did not have sex with. Her first time was definitely not with Peter. and that's like an early thing. Um, the Not to mention the fact that, like, she does blame Ned for his actions, of infidelity, even though, like, they'd been married like a week, so I would say, yeah, nah, kind of reading into that, um, too much. Um, Lice looks Lice looks nice, very sunny. Everybody's beautiful. I could totally dig some of the free cities. Now the thing is like, Lice is. I might be upset with, like, walking around and seeing slaves everywhere, and that upsetting me. Um, you probably wouldn't. That's probably not great. Um, that aspect of things. So I mean, as nice and fun as, like, Lice and Tyros and Volantis would be, it's not a great thing. And you might think that this is like, oh, something you can turn your head to, but I don't know. Like, having spent time in, like, Dubai, which, um, the Gulf states, like Bahrain, Dubai, like UAE, Qatar, um, and to a it's still there in Oman and Saudi, but Kuwait as well. It there's a large number of, like, Indian and Pakistani, uh, people that are slave labor. I mean, yes, it's indentured contracts, but, like, it's freaking slavery. They live in horrible conditions. Often their passports are taken from them. They can't go anywhere. There's no like, you know they sometimes, there's even Indians and Pakistani who have been born in those countries, and they're still just, and they've never been to India, and they're still, like, not citizens, and treated poorly, and it's an entire, like, underclass of people, and it's tough to really sit there and enjoy yourself when you see, the abuse of everybody else around you. Now, granted, like, one could make that argument that, like, all of modern society, Western society, is built upon this structure. Like, our shoes are made in a sweatshop in Vietnam, and all of that is true, but we don't see it day to day, so we can forget about it a little more. It's in your face, like, every day in the Gulf states, and so in that sense, it's really hard to enjoy yourself. And I think that the same might be true of Lice. That it would be very difficult to enjoy yourself when you're seeing, like, this abused slave class in front of you. Um, hey Preston, did Carmine look how you imagined he would? Do people tell you do people tell you you look how they imagined you before they started doing face cam? Um, yeah, it's funny because, people do say that a lot. They say, like, "Oh, I didn't think Preston would look the way he did." For the most part, they kind of say, like, "I imagine Preston to be like 500 pounds or something like that, or something." I don't know. Um, I suppose nobody ever looks how you imagine them to, because you never know. You never. I don't know. Um, so I don't know. Like, how Carmine looked versus like how I imagined him. I guess he didn't, but I don't know how much I really imagined him. But I don't know. Carmine, for the most part, yeah, he has pretty. This is gonna be, like, revealing things about Carmine. Carmine, for the most part, has very neutral features. He doesn't have, like, something that's like, he's not a character to look at or anything like that. He he he's kind of the type of person that, like, if you were in a crowd, you may not notice him, because he's like the tattered prince. You know, there's nothing. It's not like he has huge ears or enormous nose or, like, huge eyes or buck teeth or anything like that. He's just, you know, regular looking dude. So, um, Could we community crowdfund a charity donation to get George R. Martin on the chat? Has he been doing any interviews or panels lately? George R. Martin. If I were to guess, like he's got his own personal. He's got more money than he knows what to do with, and he doesn't make that many personal appearances anymore. Just not nearly as many as he used to. And he claims one reason is because he's working all the time. But it's also like I suspect there's personal issues in his life or something that keep him doing other things. He's got his personal life. His personal life is private, and I imagine that takes a lot of his time, and that's really the driver of why we don't see him that much and why we don't get wins and things like that. That there's something personal with regards to him. Because anytime when you talk about, anytime in life when you say like, why haven't I seen this person in a while? Why haven't I seen this person in a while? Usually the answer is personal. There's something personal going on. So I think in general, George R. Martin's got something personal going on. Aren't the Manderleys, the Jewish-Israel parallel, cast out of their land, newly established home? I know their faith, but their journey. Trying to think of if it's. I don't like. I don't know if there's like much there. We have a million examples of nomadic people like being from one place and going to another. And even in the story, we have examples of like the Blackwoods being from the north and ending up in the south, or the Roynish being from the Essos and coming to Westeros. So it's not that like we don't have all of the like these things around, but I'm just trying to think like besides like a people being religiously different and like finding like a safe haven somewhere. I don't know if there'd be too much more beyond that. Like I can't think of any similarity between like Manderley and Jewish people. Like, is there anything like it's or like the Manderleys known for like usury or something historically. I don't know. Let me look it up real quick, or are they only eating? Are they avoiding shellfish? So they're in the Reach. They get kicked out, and then they overreached each other. Overreached, and then they brought their wealth and fled north. Welcomed by the Starks. Became loyal to the Starks. And that's about it. There's nothing besides being a people that were nomadic. Like I don't, there's not much else there. Being a people that's nomadic with like a different religion, but there's so many examples of that, like the Tatars, the gypsies. Roma, all sorts of groups. Let's see. Will the Holy Hundred and Bonifer Hasty be in the fanfic? They already are. In our Elaine chapter, they have declared for Aegon, which caused everybody in the Vale to freak out because Littlefinger has been displaced of his lordship, which influences some of the characters in their actions in that chapter. But yes, Bonifer Hasty is and the Holy Hundred are definitely like in the story. I mean, the story is the Vale Lords coming into the Riverlands, heading towards River Run and Derry and Harrenhal. So yeah, they're a huge part. Essentially, we're making Hasty a Blackfire supporter. I mean, the Hasties were Blackfire supporters. It's very subtle, but the Hasty there. I think in a Duncan Egg story, there's a Hasty tent that you can see um, attending the Butterwell wedding, the Butterwell Frey wedding, which makes one think that they would be a Blackfire sympathizer. If I could change one thing in the books, what would it be? Oh, would you? What would it be? That's a very broad question, and really hard to think about. I don't know. I mean, I guess I would remove the common tongue. Like, I think the common tongue is the most ridiculous thing in the story, but that makes the story very complicated once we're dealing with different languages. But I think that the silliest thing in the whole story is the fact that everybody speaks the common tongue. It makes no sense. Um, and so I would probably remove that aspect of the story. Um, but in general, I think George made the story too big. He had too many plot lines and things like that. I would also not make the Dothraki like so ridiculous, like ridiculous warriors. Probably like there's a few things where I think George just goes to like extremes that I wouldn't do. That I think that like maybe it'd be better if things were a little more subtle or nuanced. Um, the Dothraki being such like one note characters, and the common tongue is a ridiculous thing. Trying to think anything else that like just like really bugs me. There's not too much. I mean, I think I would have spent more time like if I were rewriting the whole thing. I think more time needs to be spent with John appreciating wildling culture. His shift to loving the wildlings after banging Ygritte is really fast, and I think there should have been more time like him learning their ways and understanding their ways and appreciating and liking their ways, and being like, that's an interesting, better way of doing things. That's interesting. I think that needed to be there. Um, And I mean, I suppose like Tyrion being an acrobatic dwarf is pretty ridiculous too. Um, how will you handle Shireen and Stannis in the fanfic? Might Mel burn her trying to help Stannis, but resurrects Jon instead? How will Stannis respond? So I mean, not to spoil things, but like, Jon is not. Jon is going to be, staying dead for a long time. I don't know if Jon is going to be coming back. That's undecided. But Jon, at minimum, is going to be staying dead a long time. So Mel and other people, whether it be Asha or Davos, are going to be probably Asha. Mel and Asha will probably be like the main points of view, observing things at the wall. Mainly just Asha, because it seems more interesting to take a character that hasn't been there and taking them there. Like Davos has been to the wall, and has been around Stannis before, so it's more interesting to take Davos away from that environment and move him somewhere else. That's interesting. And I have some pretty good ideas on like what I'm going to do with Davos now. But Asha and Mel will probably be more of like the observing Stannis characters, and um, will Mel burn Shireen? I don't know. I mean, that's one of those things that like George said he was going to do that, but at the same time, like the story of Justin Massey, um, like going to Bravos and having adventures in Bravos and running into Arya is might be more interesting. So when I think of like what would I rather see? Would I rather see like Shireen burned um and John resurrected, which is, something we saw on the show that everyone's kind of expecting? Or would I rather see like Justin Massey having an interesting adventure with Shireen and Jane Poole in Bravos involving Arya? Like that's that that doesn't that sound more interesting? Like I'm always going to go with what's more interesting, So like I'd rather do that than something boring, or like when I think of like, do I want to keep Ghost John as Ghost and have that be a story, which would be pretty interesting, or do I want John to be resurrected and leading an army, you know? And keep in mind, to be John being resurrected, even if John's resurrected, he's not going to be a point of view. He's not going to be a point of view ever again. Okay, so because he's going to be like Lady Stoneheart, So it'd be through Mel's perspective and stuff like that. So I mean, maybe Mel and her religious, being in the mind of a religious zealot, seeing someone coming back to life and following them and being like feverish. That might be an interesting narrative. I don't know. It might be interesting to see it from Asha's perspective. I don't know, but I think that's kind of what I'm looking at. Whatever's more interesting. The Ironwoods are first men, not Andal. It's true, but the weird thing about like when we get to the first men Andal discussion when it comes to like Dorne is it doesn't fucking matter anymore. Like the Andal first men blending is indistinguishable anymore, and so it doesn't matter if like the Ironwoods are. I mean, I suppose that they're made first men because the Martells are Andals maybe, and so but like I said, it doesn't really matter. Um, the first men Andal thing is just maybe that's another thing I would have changed about the books. They make this like big deal about. I mean, this is like George and his retcons, but he makes this big deal about like, the Northerners are the blood of the first men, and the people beyond the wall, that's blood of the first men. And then you find out, no, all these people are fucking first men. First, you just throw a rock and you're hitting a first man. They're fucking everywhere, This whole thing about like werewolves. Oh, the werewolves are only north of the neck, and then no, the werewolves are fucking everywhere, and everybody's a fucking first man. They're everywhere. The blood of the first. I always think it's ridiculous, like the scene from House of the Dragon when Blackwood's like, the blood of the first man is in my veins. Yeah, everybody else, everybody fucking else. Like it's ridiculous. It's the equivalent of being like, the blood of the Celts is in my veins. Like the Celts were everywhere. They were freaking everywhere. Yes, you can argue that like the Irish are more Celtic than the rest, but they were everywhere. Like everybody's Celtic. Like it doesn't fucking matter. Like who fucking cares? To sit there and brag about being Celtic. It's like, well, that literally fucking everybody. Like everybody. I have the blood of Genghis Khan. Yeah, so does everybody. So does like. But yeah, it's. I mean, I suppose it's to establish the first men is to establish that the Martell rivalry goes on longer, but it's irrelevant at this point, because. Why won't Ghost go inside the ring at the fist? That's an interesting question. So these ring fort. So when they go to this ring fort, Now, keep in mind, like when George R. R. Martin like talked about these ring forts, he was evoking like these old like ring forts that like we're gonna find in in uh, Scandinavia. I mean, not Scandinavia, in Ireland and such, right? But the thing is like these ring forts, um, when they were actually like new, you know, they were like larger, right? And then at what point are the characters actually mistaking a ring fort for the ruins of a castle? You know, like an actual castle that was on top of that, on top of that, or maybe not a castle, maybe a modern tower, some sort of like lookout, something more modern. Um, but you know, certainly there might be something else like with regards to like during the fights of the first men against the others and things like that, and did they have special magic to their special technology to keep like telepathic thoughts and things like that out. Now I think the others have any problem sending their dead into the ring fort? No. So I guess just he thinks it's creepy. But then again, like Ghost was trying to get John to go look at that stash. So maybe it could also just be that he didn't want to go in because he was trying to get John to stay out of the ring fort because he wanted John to come down and find the dragon glass stash. So I mean, it could be a lot of different things going on. Maybe he just something creeped him out about it, the old history about, or maybe there was something technological with regards to like telepathic bonds or whatever. But then again, I mean, the wall, the ghost passes through the wall all the time, so I'm gonna take that one away. So he just finds it like creepy and something smells bad about it or something, and then he wants to keep John outside so he can go get that dragon glass stash. There's a lot of these like mysterious things of like the direwolf being angry at various times, like not trusting Freys and stuff like that, and you're like, okay, like, but at what point is the direwolf doing something because it's the direwolf sensing something? At what point is it time traveling Bran or some sort of puppet master, things like that, or a subconscious aspect of the person that it's bonded with? There's so many things, and at some point you just kind of go, George was just doing it randomly. Oh man, I'm so far behind. We're still talking about Men at Greywater Station. Howland is an elusive fungus hive mind monster. Maybe. But this is the the Men of Greywater Station fungus. But Greywater Station, I mean, it's an interesting story to read in that it's one of those like false visions kind of story. And so like, keep in mind when I first joined the fandom, all they were like people were fully believing that all these prophecies were like coming true, and there was something like great and noble about John like fulfilling prophecy and being the destiny child with Kelly and Michelle and all this, saving the world, fulfilling prophecy. And then you read George R. R. Martin's like other stories, and prophecy is always just like a trick. It's always a trick. There's always something nefarious going on with it. And so, it was definitely not what the fandom wanted to hear at that point. Everybody's R plus L equals J. He's the Messiah. Prophecy. Like even Wheel of Time like didn't end that way. So, with like classic plot prophecy kind of stuff. Do you think George R. R. Martin will change the I'm trying to figure out the acronym ASBAF, but let's say it's the prince that was promised, or Azor Ahai or something. to B plus L equals J. I mean, I can answer this without knowing the acronym, but the um, but I would say that like, what does George really think that like, I mean, how much will George change the story? And I would say that George will probably change the story a lot. I don't know if he'll reverse R plus L equals J if that thing really if that's really happened, maybe. But I think if you were writing the story, wouldn't you want to write something different and new? I mean, George talks about how he's so bored, that he gets bored when he knows where things going and he doesn't like to outline. Well, the show is already kind of an outline, right? Like, so if it seems like that he would want to change that. So I'd say it's up in the air on whether he'll have it be important, whether he'll have it be part of the story or what. Like whether he'll change the lineage. Like certainly he left it open where he can do whatever he wants, but we'll see what he does. I mean, you got to remember again that like George likes surprises a lot, and you can ask like, did anyone expect when A Dance with Dragons was coming out that it was going to be Jon and Dany doing nothing, Tyrion on a trip, and then a story about Aegon's invasion and things like that. Like it's or even Mance playing a role in getting Theon out of Winterfell. Like no one would have ever guessed that story would have happened. There's stories out of nowhere, and that's what he likes. He likes stories out of nowhere. That surprise us constantly. Does Gregor Clegane get too much hate? No, Gregor Clegane does not get too much hate. Gregor Clegane is a horrible, horrible, horrible human being. Now, him being a horrible, horrible, horrible human being doesn't mean he was necessarily guilty for like the Scherer and Wendish Town and things like that. And it doesn't necessarily mean he was guilty of killing Sir Hugh. But, I mean, in murdering Sir Hugh. He killed Sir Hugh, but is he guilty of murdering Sir Hugh intentionally? But independent of absolving him of those two crimes, he's a horrible human being. I mean, he's a rapist. He's a murderer. He's no one denies that he, smashed a baby against a wall and raped Elia. Like, and no one denies like the story that Chiswick told about the inn. Gregor Clegane was a, and no one denies the story of what he did to the Hound, his brother. He is a evil character with no redeeming qualities. The guy does not get too much hate. There's no repairing the mountain. Even if you absolve him of a few crimes that he was blamed of, he would be that's it. He's dreadful. Do you buy that Dondarrion is dead? Will him or Edric play an important role in the fanfic? So, this is an interesting question. I have not decided yet if Dondarrion is dead. So Dondarrion, and the reason that Dondarrion might be alive is that we hear secondhand that Dondarrion passed his kiss to Lady Stoneheart, to Catelyn to create Lady Stoneheart. But in the appendix of A Feast for Crows, a second band of the Brotherhood Without Banners is listed. That band contains Edric Dane, Greenbeard, Probably, I think there's a few new characters, Swampy Meg, other stuff like that. Um, so there is this other band. Now, maybe they're just being led by Greenbeard, you know, or whoever, or Edric Dane himself as a little boy. But it's interesting that, he's still the leader of that band. Let me bring up the actual. Now, granted, like in the story, the appendix is set up in a certain way. One could argue that the appendix is set up in a certain way because we want to have the reveal of Lady Stoneheart be a surprise, and we don't find out that Dondarrion is dead until kind of the end of the Brienne story. So one could certainly make that argument that we have that the appendix was there for a particular reason, to fool us. But yes, we have his and Beric Dondarrion, once Lord of Blackhaven, 6 times slain, leading Edric Dane, the Mad Huntsman, Greenbeard, Anguy the Archer, Merritt of Moontown, Waddy the Miller, Swampy Meg, John O'Nunn. So, meanwhile, Lady Stoneheart is listed as alive. Beric Dondarrion is listed as dead. So, maybe he's dead, maybe he's alive. Nonetheless, they will be back into the story because I think Davos. I think Davos will probably head south as a emissary, and will be running in, and will be heading into the Neck. And so all of by at least the end of the fanfic, we will have, him making it maybe perhaps to Greywater Watch, or running into the Brotherhood without the other Brotherhood without banners in the Neck. Perhaps we'll see. It's a long way off. We're talking years and years. Thank you, Shift Dougler. Do you think that we pay so much attention to the plot lines of A Song of Ice and Fire that we don't appreciate enough literature? No, don't appreciate enough of the literature. I do. I think a lot of people do kind of miss the actual thematic elements, but this goes for almost everything today. People are so busy learning all of the facts and figuring out the plot that the themes are kind of become secondary. When the theme is the reason why why the author is writing the book. They're sometimes. I don't know if everybody is, but certainly George R. R. Martin is thinking about the themes and the purpose, and he wants us to think war is bad and wants us to think about the human condition and morality and who creates morality and what it is to be moral and things like that, and who should we follow, and what political systems are good and what makes a good leader, and all sorts of things. We're supposed to be thinking about the political, the moral, the aspects of the story. And yeah, when people are trying to figure out, and I was the same, figuring out all the little schemes and million characters and how they interact and stuff like that it kind of takes away from things. Yeah, and it does kind of frustrate me as well when when people think about where the story is going and it's way outside of a thematic element or how it's described. Like I say, people bring this up to me a lot about Quentin, and they're Quentin is this sort of his story as the hero's journey, and it's no, it's not. There's nothing thematically in there about Quentin and the hero's journey. That's not in there at all. That's a complete misreading of the Quentin themes. The Quentin themes are more about Vietnam, and what young men think about before they go to war, and becoming a hero in war and an adventure being war and things like that. Not um, I'm gonna slay a dragon, or anything like that, or tame a dragon. So it's but yeah, I do think that like thematic elements are really really important, and you kind of supposed to ask like why does this story exist? Like what is the purpose? Like I understand like we don't talk about it very much, but like like Tyrion's journey to Slaver's Bay. Um, how does it really represent like his moral journey and like him getting over his dad and like his like reawakening and things like that? Like, and George thought about it, but at the same time, and did George succeed? Like George's not necessarily like succeeding in all of his in all of his plots either. Like not everything is Brienne, but as successful as Brienne. But there's important thematic elements to all of these sorts of things. It's not just random people doing stuff. But yeah. Hey PJ, longtime fan. Where do you see Tyrion's character ending? Will he discover personal agency like Brienne and Jaime, or just keep being a jerk? One would think that he's supposed to discover personal agency by the end. Certainly that's what they did in the show, or at least that's what he claims at the end in the show. Like he makes his speech like I thought I knew best and I didn't, like he makes that speech. They wanted that to be his journey. I'm not sure if it was the journey, but they wanted that to be the journey. And the idea was at the end, he had learned enough that he could be a good leader. I don't know if that's really the case, but yeah, I think Tyrion needs to stop being a jerk and eventually have a big realization on what he's doing. Now I don't know when he's gonna have that realization. Certainly in the show, it wasn't even until he didn't really start sensing it until the death of Randall Tarley, where he's like, ooh, what am I doing? And then looking at King's Landing, what's going on? So hopefully more hints before that, but yeah, he needs to, he should have that transformation. Tyrion's the closest we have to a main character to the story. So one would think that he would eventually get that, but we'll see. We'll see how long it takes. He does have a few moments like George R. R. Martin does. He puts in these existential crisis moments where in his stories where a character like sits and has either a fever dream or like stares out at water and thinks about how weird the world is and has a mental breakdown. And Tyrion does have a few of these, the major one being when he's on the Shy Maid and he's like staring out at the darkness of the water. But then like afterwards, he's not really that different. So but Martin characters and their moral journeys, I think about Dying of the Light being the most important one. It happens in Fever Dream too, but there's like, moments. There's moments like where the character like very clearly actively changes and it will be obvious that they are now a different person. And we haven't really seen it with Tyrion. We've had the moments where he's had the reflection, and then when he comes out of it, he's kind of the same fucking idiot, right? So we'll see. One would think that the way George R. R. Martin writes that's going to happen, considering that's the way he's written his other stories. Wildlings hate the Starks. They see them as smug elites who kept them out of the realm. Perhaps, but at the same time, with regards to they see themselves as kindred to the Starks. And this is very similar to, like, say you talk to an Ethiopian and an Eritrean. Okay, Ethiopians and the Eritreans have had their history, but they both recognize that they have a united history behind. It's the same with, like, the Taiwanese and the Chinese. Like, you can say that they hate each other, but they also recognize that they are kind of they have a common history and a common culture that once you go backwards in time. And so, yeah, it's the same with America and England. We kind of recognize that we've got this common connection. So it's like, do they like hate the Starks? Probably depends on who, but again, they kind of see themselves as like kin in some respect. And strangely, when Ygritte wanted to have Jon survive, she introduces him as the bastard of Winterfell as something important, which at least helps in Rattleshirt's decision not to kill him. So there's something there, with the story of the Blue Rose and the Winter Rose and stuff like that the Starks and the Wildlings are one, and so that there is reunification is a theme of the story and a possibility for the Starks and the Wildlings. Certainly with regards, the chink in the wall and the Blue Rose being the thing growing from the chink in the wall, like the thing that's bringing, and the Wildlings seeing the wall as like this thing that's divided their people, and being this like symbol of pain. And so it's there's something to it. East Germany, West Germany. So, but John is this like reunification like character, right? He's trying to reunify the people, and bring down the wall in that respect. How do we keep track of how old people are in Westeros, with seasons lasting as long as years? What is their basis for a year, and how did they arrive there? So this is a big. So for the most part, we know that a year in Westeros is roughly 12 moons. So a month is a month, a moon is a month, and 12 moons is a year. So their years are roughly like the same length as our years. Now, the question is, like, how did they get to that? Now, they could have just counted 12 years. 12 is a fairly useful number to split things in. So maybe they just took 12 and said that's a year. 12 moons is a year. That's not out of the question. And then there's this idea that maybe at one time there weren't uneven seasons, and that the basis of the year came from a time where there were not uneven seasons and things like that. Because in olden days, people could track the sun and the lengths of days, and so they knew shortest day, longest day. They figured that out. And so, and they had that 360 kind of mentality of a circle and 365 days. They'd figured it out. It was in that ballpark. And so, but we know that the days get shorter with regards to the seasons in Westeros. So that's not happening. You can't track a solar year. So they're either basing it on when the world used to have stable seasons and a solar year was trackable, or they're just adding up 12 months and just going, it's 12 moons. 12 moons is a year. So we don't know what the truth is. I suspect that George R. Martin intended it to be the former, that it was when the seasons were regular, that there was a time when the seasons were regular. Though, I don't know how plant life would have survived, had and evolved that way, had the had the had their had uneven seasons been relatively recent, as in like within the last 8,000 years. With like, it's just not enough time for the evolution of all the things that we've seen. Like Westeros has things like it has wheat that grows, in the winter time and things like that, and things like that. It's just of course, it could be that George R. R. Martin doesn't know what things like winter wheat are, but I bring this up because so winter wheat, we use this term winter wheat because it's something you plant in the autumn, and then you're able to then harvest it the next year. But George R. R. Martin clearly thinks that winter wheat is something you harvest in late autumn or in the winter, which is very different, like completely different from what we're thinking. He has a line in an Elaine chapter saying winter wheat was ripening on in the fields, and you're like, that's not how winter wheat works. It's okay, but winter wheat is different in Ice and Fire, so it's something that like, yeah, you can actually grow in the wintertime or something, or late autumn, harvest it in late autumn or something. So I don't know. They have genetic engineering, magic, something, but I don't know. It's one of the two. 12 months. That's it. I don't know. Could Night's Watch conspirators write the pink letter? Certainly, this is a theory that has been around. That it was actually Bowen Marsh working with Clytus, because we kind of know that there's a conspiracy on that front. That the letter seems to be resealed. Couldn't they have opened the letter, or opened a letter, or just sealed it themselves, written a completely different letter and sealed it themselves? There's a few things in there that makes it weird for the Night's Watch, and the main one being, I want my reek back. So, like, I'll read it real quick. Your false king is dead, bastard. Night's Watch can know that. He and his host were smashed in 7 days of battle. They can know that. We have his magic sword. They know that. You tell his red whore. You know that. Your false king's friends are dead. Their heads upon the walls of Winterfell. Come see them, bastard. Your false king lied. So did you. They told the world that they'd burn the king beyond the wall. Instead, you sent them to Winterfell to steal my bride from me. Then we're getting into some things that are a little weirder. Like, it could be that they're taking information from another letter, or adding information, because obviously the Night's Watch wouldn't know about the Mance Rayder plot. So because they all think that Mance Rayder got burned. And they don't know about the spear wives and things like that, because he says, I want my bride back. I want Mance Rayder back. Come and get him. I have him in a cage. Proof of your lies. Made him a warm cloak of the skins of your 6 whores who came with him to Winterfell. Knowing about Ramsay and flaying, not as impossible, but it's a little weird that they would have that information. I want my bride back. I want my false king's queen. I want his daughter and the Red Witch. I want his wildling princess. I want his little prince and the wildling babe. And I want my reek. That's the weird one. Why would the Night's Watch know anything about like Theon's nickname Reek and all of that? Send them to me, bastard, and we want to trouble your black crows. Keep them from me, and I'll cut out your bastard's heart and eat them. Ramsay Bolton, True Board Lord of Winterfell. So that's that's kind of the weird aspects to it. So there's aspects to it that, like, how would they know that information? But one could say, well, maybe Ramsay sent one letter and they're editing it and changing it, which is sure, all possible. Why not keep Mance alive publicly then? easier to keep wildlings in line that way. Why not glamour Bones as Mance to trick Val instead of the other way around? Why is he the king he needed to burn? Um, let's see. So let's see. There's a few things that are going on here. Stannis is trying to appease his own people with sacrifice. He's trying to get some wildlings to convert. Um, he's trying to trying to think of some other things. He's trying to be portrayed as their savior. Of course, none of that really works. But why not? Why not keep Mance alive at the wall and use him like publicly? Um, hmm. I guess it's this idea that if Mance is a puppet, he's seen as a weak. He's seen as weak. While if he's working for Stannis, like secretly, the wildlings would more likely like want to rescue him and fight for him that way or something like that. Like he's tricking them into doing his bidding without them knowing that they're doing his bidding. Because you'd think that like, okay, Mance is captured and now he's the puppet of Stannis. Is that really something wildlings want to follow, or would they follow the Weeper or Tormund? At that point, you know, um, versus like, you know, uh, I need to prove my honor by rescuing Mance because he's in a cage and things like that. Now, realistically, like if we're really talking about like settling people south of the wall and stuff like that, and letting them through the wall and giving them lands, like you'd think they'd be open to this, other than being killed by the others. Like, why is it so hard? It's actually pretty surprising that so few cross the wall versus and versus running off with the Weeper, like like or running off with Tormund. One would have thought that many more, considering that they were offered like land, like they're offered their lives to go through the wall. One would think that a lot more people would have taken Stannis's offer, but they didn't. So I mean, we have to chalk it up to the wildlings being like completely irrational in who they follow, and that they only follow strength, and stuff like that. That's all the only way we could possibly interpret it. But yeah, really, they're desperate people that should have all gone through the wall and been like, fine, you want us to convert to your religion? Go for it. Let's do it. Um, why are the others scared of iron? And why aren't bronze and iron the metals of winter if iron didn't come to Westeros until the Andals? A couple different things here. I don't know if the others are scared of iron. Um, they they certainly like when Waymar Royce fights. He doesn't seem to be too scared of the guy's sword. I'm not sure if the others are scared of iron. Um, Now the answer on like bronze, like so iron is this weird thing because like there's this story that like the Andals brought the iron, which is like to so loosely in the story, George has like the Iron Age, Bronze Age like shift, right? So like originally, we have the Stone Age time where people are using stone, obsidian, things like that, for your weapons, and then there's a point in which they figure out how to produce bronze, which is a blending of tin and copper, and so then the Bronze Age happens, and we've got that going for a long time, but tin actually ends up becoming really hard to find, and so people start switching to iron. which is harder to make because you've got to have these big, hot ovens and stuff. But originally people, then people start doing iron and steel. And so this idea is that like the Andals had figured out iron, and they're the ones bringing it to Westeros. But then we have stories about the Ironborn and the Iron Men, and the Starks using iron swords on their tombs and everything. So it all just doesn't make any sense. And this is just a number of things. I mean, George puts in like round towers versus square towers and stuff like this that are out of time and stuff like that, and domes and things that people would have never figured out at the time, because he knows that like time is all fucked up, and their knowledge of history is all fucked up. So yeah, in the end, the Andals didn't bring iron. Like we kind of know this. We know that like that's an incorrect story, but nonetheless, like something else is going on. Like there's something weird with the history of the first Men of the Andal invasion. It's just not right. The history is off. But because there was iron before that, because the Iron Men existed. So, but I don't know if the others are scared of iron. I don't know if they would, but let's get down to do. Massey isn't coming back from Bravos. If Massey even makes it to Bravos, Well, I'm sorry, I'm so way behind. I'm like hours ago in the discussion. Is there a possibility that George will let another writer write short stories in the A Song of Ice and Fire world? No, I don't think so. I mean, it's just. We have no idea what will happen to George R. R. Martin's estate once he and Paris both pass. So you never know at that point what'll happen once to his estate, because you can't, very difficult to move that, to change that. But I don't think while he's alive or while Paris is alive, we will see any writers coming in and writing his stuff. It's his. He's possessive of it. He's done collaborations in the past, but with very good friends. But all his very good friends are really old too. So I just don't see it. It's not that there aren't writers who write like George. There are a few, there are some out there, but I don't know if he hasn't given any inkling that he'd be open to it. He's just like, no one gets to do it. It's done. So that's kind of the way I see it. Is there bullying in the State Department? I mean, there, like any work environment, you're going to have bad managers and overbearing managers and things like this. I don't think the State Department's unique in any respect, but there are bad managers who the way they manage is a bullying tactic versus like good management styles of like collaboration and learning and training and things like that. I mean, one of my managers in my past was like the worst manager I've ever had, and one of the worst human beings I've ever met in my life. Like, these things happen, but I've also had some of the best, like, great people, great managers too. But I think you're going to find this in any work environment. I don't know if there's anything specific about the State Department that I would say that like bullying exists, or not. I don't think necessarily the State Department's even special either. I think a lot of people in the state might be like, oh, we're more diplomatic, we're trained in like to be more understanding. I'd be like, I don't know. I think there's a lot of horrible people everywhere. Great people and horrible people everywhere. So, I mean, when I think about bullying, that's the only kind of situation I think of is like a bad manager. Like, I can't think of it, and it's not in like a school sense when you have like your peers bullying people. You don't really get that in the work environment. You usually get a manager being the bad apple, because the manager is the one with power. You know, if another worker's bullying you, you just tell your manager, and the manager's like, "What are you doing?" You know, like, but if your manager is the bully, that's the problem. That's the problem. You know, which in your working life you'll probably run into that. In your working life, you'll probably have a really bad manager, and you will understand like, oh God, that's the worst. It's the fucking worst. Um, won't Roose kill Ramsay to upwards inherit Winterfell? Too dangerous to keep him around. So this is there's a huge mystery involved with Roose Bolton and how he handles his life and everything around him, you know, and it's mysterious. And this is why I kind of say like, oh, I should have done a Bolton series at one point. So Roose Bolton had a son, who by all accounts was awesome. Demeric Bolton. And he liked him. Everybody liked him. Demeric Bolton was fantastic. And then Roose takes on Ramsay, who may or may not even be his son. You know, he's convinced that maybe it's his son because he's got similar pale eyes. But that's essentially all, and that he banged the Ramsay's mom once. Raped her. So Ramsay proceeds to whether he does or not, he proceeds to kill Demeric, or maybe Demeric dies, but Roose certainly thinks that Ramsay killed him, and yet he keeps Ramsay alive. He keeps Ramsay around, weirdly. So maybe you're like, okay, well, if Demeric's dead, Ramsay's is only like blood of his body, so maybe he's keeping him around for that reason. Well, he gets Fat Walda, and he says he likes Fat Walda, and Fat Walda is going to bear him another trueborn son, and he even worries that like Ramsay's going to kill this baby. Like one would think any rational person would get crazy Ramsay the hell out of there, because Ramsay's just bad news on so many levels. Like the people in the North hate him, and that he's fraying his alliances. He's threatening the Frey alliance, which was like the most important one. He's threatening to kill his like new baby like when it's born, and there's so many reasons that Roose should either kill Ramsay or get Ramsay out of there. Absolutely. And this is why people came up with like the Bolton theory. They're like, well, Roose Bolton must see something advantageous about Ramsay. He must want to transfer his consciousness into Ramsay's body, or something weird like that. And so we don't really have a good answer. Roose is completely illogical, which is odd because Roose in every other respect is very timid. He keeps his options open as long as possible, And so, I mean, maybe it's that respect, he's keeping Ramsay around as long as possible before he makes a move, like he may kill Ramsay, but he hasn't quite decided yet. I want to keep my options open or something. Maybe he's delaying or something. But yeah, for most rational people, they would have not dealt with Ramsay, but Roose somehow thinks Ramsay is worth keeping around. So I don't know. It's one of the big mysteries of the story. I don't know if there's a good reason. It may be, I mean, again, when something doesn't make sense, we immediately go, well, it must be prophecy, and which takes us back to like Roose reading that book at Harrenhal and then putting it in the fire. Like, what the hell was that? Is that ever going to come back? Like, is that book ever going to come back? It's got to bring it back in the fanfic, but like, what the hell was that about? So, and like, why did Roose like feel it was so necessary to go to the Red Wedding and all sorts of weird stuff? It's just odd stuff. The Boltons make no sense, which is why I say like I should have done a Bolton series, like sit down and try to come up with some sort of like coherent narrative to it. But because it's just there seems like there's no coherent, like of any plot line in the entire story that makes no sense, it's the Boltons. But at the same time, I've never sat down and like come up with some bullshit to explain it. And Bolton is the best. The Bolton theory is the best we have. Do you buy the theory that the longer someone is dead, the less of them is left in there? Does this affect how long Jon could and should be dead for? I do. I do buy this. I mean, this is straight from very like. So, from two fronts, we have this idea of the diminishing salience of a consciousness on two fronts. So we've got like one, the idea of like dying and coming back and dying and coming back seems to diminish one's consciousness. And we have this from the mouth of Beric Dondarrion, who is living it firsthand. You know, that he just doesn't feel like he's even him anymore. He's just like a walking corpse, you know. So we've that diminishing consciousness. But then also from a Vermeer Six-Skin sense, he talks about second life and how like you can live a second life in an animal, but over time, even that begins to like diminish and you begin like start being the consciousness of it. And that there could be like echoes of it, like, you know, Orell's eagle and things like this, like having an echo of hating Jon and stuff like that. But over time, that's going to like diminish, and you're going to blend into the wolf and stuff like that. So there's a weird aspect to like say Jon coming back, because like the longer he spends in Ghost, the more of his consciousness is going to be lost to Ghost, and then also the body being brought back, and the longer that body, maybe people say, oh, you can put him in the ice cells and it'll be preserved or something, some frozen body. Not scientifically very accurate, considering that like when you freeze a body, by the way, these people that like get their heads frozen in liquid nitrogen, it's like one of the worst ways you could preserve something, because like your cells are all going to shatter. So like every cell in your body is going to shatter when you freeze, you know, something. But nonetheless, like, so yeah, it just seems really like even in the magic world that we're existing in, it seems very logistically difficult to bring Jon back. His consciousness dissolving away within the mind of Ghost in a second life, his body being frozen and resurrected and being not together, you know. And so it kind of, in a way, like the way the show did it was the most logical, where he had no second life in Ghost and the body was immediately brought back without freezing. Because that's at least the closest to Lady Stoneheart and Beric Dondarrion. So, but yeah, it seems like the less and less there shouldn't be very much of Jon, the longer he's dead. Yeah. Thoughts on Rich Madden cast as Jon, Kit cast as Robb? So yeah, a lot of times when people try out for Game of Thrones, they try out for, you know, they get the their agent gets them the reading, and then they read for many characters, because it's like you're already going to meet for them. You're already going to meet for the part. So I'm just going to read for many characters, and then hopefully I'll get one of the characters, you know. So I imagine that certainly Rich Madden read for Jon, and Jon read for, and Kit Harington read for Robb. That had to have happened, right? I'm trying to think if like, would they have worked reversed? And I'm actually looking through this that like a lot of the actors, like the one that played Ramsay, had actually E- Ewan um, read for John and things like that. Ewan Rian read for. Um, I'm sure they all read for these parts, but what if we flip them? I mean, I have to say that there's something very uh, pompous and beautiful about like Rich Madden, you know? And I think he fits more with the Rob character. Um, Even though Rob isn't necessarily that character at all. But I think he certainly doesn't fit with John, who is supposed to be this like sad, chip on his shoulder, angry about being a bastard kind of thing, kind of guy. Which Kit took that really far and was just like a sad sack all the time, which I suppose worked, but like I don't say it didn't work. It wasn't like a big problem. It wasn't very consistent with the books. Like John is not that sad. It's not as sad as Kit Harington. Also, John is not as good looking as Kit Harington. Kit Harington is John is somewhat homely. But like Kit Harington is a model, and Rich Madden is a model. But there is something weird and like pretty and arrogant and confident about Rich Madden that Kit Harington has just a little more sadness in his eyes, a little more insecurity to him. So I think they fit in the characters they are. I could see Kit Harington playing Rob, but I couldn't see Rich Madden playing John. And really, I would have picked someone a little uglier and more rugged for John. But I think overall, Kit Harington did fine. It's so hard to separate it now because we just like it's so iconic that now Kit Harington is Jon Snow, but he's very different from Book John. I mean, very different from Book Rob too. But um, but it kind of it worked. It worked. When do you think George last took a tab? Um, oh, so when we say here what we're saying here with taking a tab, he's talking about like doing some sort of drugs, well, whether it be ecstasy or today I think people might use it for a Molly or something, but I think we're talking about like LSD for for George, like back in the day, would be like to take a tab. Um, I wouldn't say that like George would be against it at any point. Um, I think that once you just get older and stuff, you probably just don't do it as much. But I don't think that like George would be necessarily against um, any of the drug use. Uh, I just don't know if I necessarily saw him doing it either, because George was very studious and very hardworking. Um, and though he was a hippie, he hung out with like very very nerdy sci-fi hippies, and so it's like the Peter Paul and Mary hippie versus like the um, Doors. I don't know, Janis Joplin. Even though he loves Janis Joplin, like kind of like drug use hippie. Because hippies come in many types. So I mean, I don't know. I've never really thought about like how much drug use George R. Martin has done. I mean, he certainly writes about it. He certainly writes about psychotropic drugs quite a bit. Um, so I'm sure he's tried his psychotropic drugs, but like I don't know if he you know probably stopped doing it once he had a real job in Hollywood and stuff like that, a 9 to 5. That's the big thing, is having a 9 to 5 kind of takes away from your ability to do heavy drug use. The answer is that the long night was only 5,000 years ago, coinciding with Old Man said hate the others, hate iron in book 1. Let me see here. I want to bring up this idea that the okay. All right, so the others hating iron is this kind of like, let's see, I'm going to get the quote. In Bran 4, he says, Old Nan nodded. In that darkness, the others came for the first time, she said as her needles went click, click, click. They were cold things, dead things that hated iron and fire and the touch of the sun and every creature with hot blood in its veins. They swept over holdfasts and cities and kingdoms, felled heroes and armies by the score, riding their pale dead horses and leading hosts of the slain. All the swords of men could not stay their advance, and even maidens and suckling babes found no pity in them. They hunted the maids through frozen forests and fed their dead servants on the flesh of human children. Now, obviously there's like aspects to the story that seem to be true and aspects of the story that seem to be false. Like, you know, they're obviously not eating the children, they're taking the children to convert to others or whatever, and things like that. But there's this idea of like hated iron and fire. I mean, they definitely certainly the whites hate fire. Now, on top of this, you've got Waymar Royce finding that the dead wildlings that they find in the prologue, that they had an iron axe and that it was left behind. It was a valuable weapon. So it kind of let him know that like this wasn't a wildling attack, because the iron was left behind. But would an other use an iron thing? Now I think whites brandish weapons, and the question is, you know, is it just steel? You know, like for some reason, if you take the iron, you turn it into steel. Are the others all of a sudden fine with it? Because, you know, they certainly brandish weapons. Or is it something like George wrote and then like forgot about it and then just didn't care? But there seems to just be, besides like leaving behind that weapon in the prologue, and that the story from Old Nan that says that they hated iron, I don't know if doesn't seem to be anything else in the story with regards to like them hating iron. So it might be like some sort of thematic thing, like the Starks are associated with iron, and thus they don't like it, and thus they hate the Iron Kings or something. They hated the realms of man because they hate the realms of man were surrounded by iron. But you are right about this. Like this is another piece of evidence that like the Iron Age had already happened in Westeros, and that the Andals did not bring their iron. So it was just kind of like some odd things. Why would the others? Yeah, why would the others hate iron? Maybe they just they hated man, so they hated iron. I don't know, but or somebody. It's too easy for her to say Valyrian steel or something like Valyrian steel, so they had to change it to iron. The story got changed or something. Mm-mm-mm. Doop 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 doop. Hello, hello. How are you?
I have a quick super chat, not a super chat, that I kind of wanted to run by you if you don't mind.
Sure thing.
Um, I sent it to you on Discord. I have to ask you beforehand though, did the Maester conspiracy, that's yours?
Um, I wouldn't say it's mine. I would say that I perhaps was the first to popularize it. It's like Quentin is alive. It's
Ah,
definitely something that I had heard about before. I think Brand Voss mentions it. Brand Voss has a thing, talks about it, um, and so he certainly was talking about it before me. But I was probably the first to like popularize it or something, or make it have. It's like Quentin is alive. I didn't come up with Quentin is alive. Other people were already talking about it, but I didn't come up with Lemongate. Other people were already talking about it. So it's just that like you take on, you find something interesting, then you research it more, and then you take it on more. So I probably did a lot more research and looked into it. But yeah, but
would
why
you
do you ask about?
say, because there was such a, I don't want to say this out loud because it seems like I'd be bullying the person who made the tweet, but I sent you something on Discord. The reason I sent you on Discord is I'm not trusting your live streaming capabilities right now because your thing is all over the place. Your thing is all over the place and glitching. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
You
it
trying to hide
is.
it?
When I started, it was glitching, and I'm seeing this like flash of stuff, and I'm sure people are saying there's like freezings and stuff.
But there's
But
a like a Twitter post I kind of wanted like I kind of it's not like big enough for like a podcast discussion, but I feel like this person went out of their way to do the mental gymnastics to make this seem like a thing when it's not a thing.
can you just can you Facebook message it to me?
Yeah, I can, as long as like your stream's not gonna fuck up and show my
No. It's
Facebook
I mean it's
profile.
right here on my phone.
Okay, gotcha. Let me
Yeah.
just send it to you real quick. One second. Let me log
Yeah,
in.
I'm actually like because you're saying I'm like glitching. I don't want to like open something that takes as much memory as Discord to read a message.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah.
One second here. By the way, ironically, talking about George taking drugs from what happened last week. For those of you who don't know, I'll out myself. I took an edible last week when I was on stream with Preston, and it hit really fast. I didn't expect it to hit that fast, so I had to try super hard to like stay focused.
Um,
That's gonna hurt your brain, and I know you're gonna be very nice about it, but that person is out of their fucking mind.
I don't think the Maester conspiracy for a lot of reasons, but I just don't know why George R. Martin would ever put in this vast Illuminati anti-Semitism conspiracy to deny the people their rightful Targaryen rulers into his work. That's just dot dot dot, not his critique of the Maesters. Um, it's for I don't know what the anti-Semitism Illuminati thing is in there, but
They go. This person goes on to explain why they think it's anti-Semitism. They
all
go
right,
on to explain it's a theory that's. Do you mind if I go into it, or
sure.
it's a theory that's just bizarre and non. I'm reading their post. It's a theory that's
Hmm.
just bizarre and nonsensical combination of Marwyn's complaints and Barbary Dustin's complaints, but both which are entirely different and based off things we know for sure aren't true. Extrapolated to a ton of stuff in Fire and Blood that is just illogical. Um.
I mean,
Uh.
they are whoa. I mean, I'm glad they at least mentioned Barbary like Dustin's complaint and Marwyn, but they are not at all different. Like they like so Barbary Dustin's complaint is specifically about um Southern ambitions and like a conspiracy of maesters working to try to get to oust the Targaryens. Like she's talking about uh, like she's talking about Maester Wallace whispering in the ear of Rickard Stark into trying to get his southern ambitions to marry the Lyanna to Robert. Like that's it's straight up with like Barbary Dustin is straight up talking about a conspiracy of maesters. Okay, and Marwyn is straight up talking about a conspiracy of maesters when he talks about who killed the dragons last time. So it's a connection in the sense that we have a conspiracy of maesters that Marwyn is complaining about and a conspiracy of maesters that Lady Dustin is complaining about. Now, the action of the conspiracy of maesters is different. One is ousting the Targaryen regime and the other is killing dragons. But which, considering that one births the other, they're kind of related. You know, like Targaryens do hatch and produce dragons. So like it's like not like we've got a conspiracy of maesters in both stories. And then in one story we have dragons, and then in the other story we have the birthers of dragons. So what's disingenuous about the post is that you're trying to make people that believe this theory into anti-Semites. You know, like
someone
it's
asked
just
this person,
ridiculous, okay? Or calling George an anti-Semite. No.
well,
Like
they asked, the Maesters are Jewish coded. How? And the person responded, they're just treated like a shadowy cabal by theorists, which makes that does.
does this person think that all conspiracies are Jewish? Like
They're kind of tailing on themselves.
this is the thing is like all like shadowy conspiracies, like you can have a shadowy conspiracy and not have it be Jewish. Like was the X-Files like anti-Semitic? Is that what we're supposed to think? You know, like what
I just wanted to run
is
that
Dune?
by.
Is Dune anti-Semitic?
Well,
I mean, it's anti-Semitic in the sense that Arabs are Semites, and that there's a lot of statements about Arabs in this. I don't know, but like, you know, do we think that the Bene Gesserits? Are we supposed to think that the Bene Gesserits, like, we can never have a conspiracy in a story because all of a sudden, if we start talking about conspiracies, people are going to think we're talking about Jewish space lasers and Illuminati kind of stuff, and that's it.
That's Netanyahu's trump card, the space laser. By the way, for people asking the link to this post, I'm not going to give it because I don't want
because then you're gonna get people harassing the person. But like,
right. So let's not do that.
Let's not do that. It's just a bad take. Like, and just
it is.
It's. I mean, the Maester conspiracy is one of those things where, like, keep in mind that, like, as a person that everybody's been calling like the crazy, like, Howl at the Moon, like, person. The Grand Maester conspiracy has never been one that people have ever, like, really harassed me about. They're like, I think all of Preston Jacobs' theories are wrong, except for maybe the Maester conspiracy one. Like, they always have like that one. That one's probably true. You know?
I feel like anything could be anti-Semitic if you try really hard enough, and this person was doing some mental gymnastics. Ice and Fire fandom has always been like this crazy. Like, always. People unironically fight over the blacks and the greens, and
yeah. I mean, the thing about like anti-Semitism is that anti-Semitism is a incredibly weird crutch used by both racists to justify something and people that are blindly trying to shield something that don't have a shield either. And so, like, you just kind of like throw it out there. It's just like, oh gosh, like, it has nothing to. Ice and Fire has remarkably little to do with Jewish people. In fact, the beginning of my stream, I actually like had a whole rant about how, like,
I was there.
about Dorne and how, like, like the Jews are so important to medieval like Spanish history, and the fact that like you're going to have a like say that Dorne is a stand-in for for Spain and have like zero like stand-ins for the Jewish people who are a huge part of medieval Spain. Like if any sense that like he's George R. R. Martin has created all of these parallels in the stories to like Catholicism and all sorts of like uh, like colonialism and all sorts of stuff. One thing he has just not touched is Jewish people. He has just not touched it. Like it's just not part of his story. Like
I
there's just
love Mark.
nothing.
Mark's comment here. It's Thoros, not Soros. True, Mark. True. I agree with that. It's perfect. Real quick before I hop off, because
Oh,
yeah,
you have something else to
we're cover.
do.
What? I'm waiting on the call from a friend. We're going to cover Gen V. I was
Yes,
gonna say
yes.
Z.
I watched the first episode last night.
How was it?
Um, it was okay. Um,
Oh, die! You gotta watch all three together because they
I
released
will.
all
I
three
will. No, I
together.
can't. It's long. It's long and exhausting. Okay,
Really?
but yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the boy. It's still as violent as the boys. Um, I mean, we'll get to it when we do our podcast, but I actually think the show probably would have been stronger had it not been linked to the boys universe. I think that
Huh?
oh yeah, I'm spent like so much time. I'm just sitting there being like, how can this happen in the same universe? How can there be this many? Like, this is so, like, really, is this consistent? And once you step back from that and start looking at the show by its own merits, because
Mm.
it's not tonally the same as the boys at all. The characters aren't. The violence and the sex is on par with the
Mm.
boys, but tonally, it is not the same show. Um, and also thematically, it is not the same show. It's got some very interesting, important thematic messages that are going on, um, that have nothing to do with the boys. It's a much more earnest show. It's a much more. It's in fact, and when they cut away to stuff in the boys' universe that's cynical and tongue in cheek, it breaks with like what the story is. At least in this first episode, because the show is very like the elements of the characters. It's a very serious show with some very serious themes, and it, unlike the boys, which just kind of like takes a piss out of everything, and it's just not almost nihilist. At least the first two seasons. The third season, the boys kind of moves against that, but like the boys is kind of nihilist, right? Um, this show is not that. It's but I don't know. The characters aren't as interesting as the boys, but at the same time,
How
like
dare you say this?
they're
Stop.
dealing with some pretty interesting themes, um, that I do
Mm.
appreciate, but that focus on like youth and the troubles facing youth and things like that. So I'm gonna say like again, I'm basing it on one episode, but there are things that I like about it. There are things that I don't like about it. I think it. I understand why they wanted to make it part of the boys' universe because to ride that coattail and get people to watch it, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with the boys. But you'll see. You'll see.
Give it the two and third episode because I keep people keep telling me they've released the three episodes for a reason, and I'm assuming like you have to like digest all of it, not just one third of it. So I want to watch episodes 1, 2, and 3, which I'll do either today or tomorrow. And yeah, we'll go into it. Ahsoka, by the way, this coming week is done, and then we get to Loki. So
Okay.
much stuff.
All right. It sounds good.
Also, I don't know how much of a fan you are of John Wick, but yeah,
I
Continental
haven't
that's a
seen it. I haven't
pass.
seen John
I don't
Wick.
know if you want to like get into Continental. Okay, never mind then. Good,
I
good,
haven't seen
good.
John Wick. No, no, no. I haven't seen it. Yeah. All right. Um, Tyrion and Quentin take up 16 of 73 chapters. It's like 22% of the book. Easily could have scrapped Quentin and cut Tyrion to 4 chapters. Um, if you believe Quentin is dead, yeah, you could probably scrap Quentin as a point of view. Certainly, that's kind of the reason. One of the big reasons I don't think Quentin is dead is that I think he was rather important. Um, but also Tyrion, I think the Tyrion could have been pared down quite a bit. I think the first and second Tyrion chapters specifically could have been merged, as well as the two chapters on the Shy Maid could have been merged. He could definitely been pared down. He could have, and not only the number of chapters, the length of those chapters is atrocious. Like Tyrion's Volantis chapter is ridiculous. It could have been half the length and stuff like that, and could have been combined with the one before in Cell Horace. But yeah, absolutely. Um, uh, that's not many new people being sent to the wall. Imagine Roose sends Ramsay there. He'd be interested in an addition of Lord Commander eventually. Um, oh, like sending Ramsay to the wall. Oh. Like could the Boltons take over the wall by like sending Ramsay to be Lord Commander at some point? By killing John and having Ramsay be Lord Commander. Uh I just don't know. We have no interest. We have no inkling that we have no inkling that the Boltons have any interest in the wall, um, which is weird. I mean, the Starks only had a mild interest in the wall as well, but that would have been a funny thing to have Ramsay show up. Um, I mean, please, who else would want to see sent to the wall? There's a lot of characters that I think are interesting to be sent to the wall. But like I say, like you I think with any of the peak characters in weird places, um, you want like the extremes. So this is why I want like Aaron in going to Starfall, or Ariel Hota going to the Iron Islands, or Asha going to the Wall. You get like very different characters who are seeing this place that's very exotic and different to them, and their feelings about that. And so, you know, Ramsay being at the Wall would be fascinating to see um, Melisandre interact with Ramsay, but but even um, but even Asha meeting him, having a lot of different characters um, meet Ramsay would be fascinating. It's almost too bad that like Ramsay has been mostly limited to Theon's perspective, because he's just like there's so many interesting aspects of him, right? Like Bran sees him, but that's about it, right? Bran and Theon are the only characters who have met Ramsay in point of views. Be fascinating. Um, did Howland Reed does Highland Reed die in the fanfic, please? We'll see. I kind of have an idea of that I want Howland Reed to be completely absent, maybe until the very, very end. Similar to the character in Dying of the Light. There's a poet in Dying of the Light that everyone keeps talking about, and then he shows up at the very, very end to do a very simple thing. He just like draws a square on the ground and does nothing much else. You know, they have a short conversation. But I kind of see that with Howland Reed, that he's this like mystery box that you're going to be searching the entire story for, and then eventually find, you know, somewhere else doing something weird and mysterious. Um, Grateful Dead tickets came with perforated tabs. Really? Um, oh, Okay. So they came with the tabs that you could then add. I imagine you added um, the drugs to later. Be hard to blotters. I mean, I understand that like a lot of people were selling like the tabs with the logos on them and everything. I don't know if like the Grateful Dead as a money making institution was selling these, but maybe. Anyway, I can't find anything on it, but um, seems like something they'd be sued for at some point. um, let's see here. Love the Grateful Dead. I feel like they are the type of band people either love or hate. Um, I think about it, they are a band that people either love or hate, but I think it's more the cultural aspect of it. If you actually just like listen to the Grateful Dead's music, like it's very difficult to like, and you're into music. Um, it's very it's very difficult to be like, oh, that's just your like this is just a horrible song, you know. Um, I think because what is it? I'm trying to think of the classic one. Um, what people there one with like the am I misremembering that there's one with like a horse on the front, but I don't know. Terrapin Station, is that the one that everybody likes? Um, but some of the ones in certainly kind of the classic 70s ones that people kind of like, it's difficult to like hate everything if you know just be like, well, some solid songs here and there before you can eliminate all the jammy stuff and stuff like that. But it's a lot different from like hating Fish, where like even though Fish has an album that's pretty poppy, Hoist, that's hard not to be like, well, these are just pop songs, but um, yeah, people do, but I think it's the cultural thing that people like or dislike the band because of. Um, versus say like Dave Matthews, where I can like listen to that and just be like, no, I hate the music. Or people are like, I love it. Like, there's nothing listening to Grateful Dead where you're like, I really hate that. Um, Iron needs hotter forges. Others can't attack them. That might be it. That like the others just don't like going into places with like big furnaces where there's fire and we're back on the what why others would hate iron, that they actually just hate like the very hot like furnaces and everything that have fire around that allow people to perhaps forge weapons or even Valyrian steel. Um, da, 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 da. George indicated that the Long Night was probably 5,000 years ago. It coinciding with the Andal invasion fixes so many timeline issues, including iron. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's some sort of so spake Martin that he says that about when when the Long Night was, because certainly the books claim 8,000 years, but them happening them happening all at the same time. The Andal invasion, or the Andals arriving with iron right before to help, or that there's a war going on and the world is coming in to introduce other stuff to deal with this fight. Um, is is could all explain it. Um, but I'm actually more of, obviously I'm more of the belief that there was some sort of very advanced society before the Long Night that had all of those things in already, and that the Andals, you know, didn't necessarily invade in the same way. Give us another rant tonight, PJ. Well, you gotta 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 get something to boil my blood. Boil my blood. Um, let's see. Grateful Dead and a lot of hippie bands were CIA psyops anyway. Uh, I mean, obviously there's joking, but it's hard to get CIA to do stuff domestically. Dumb Grateful Dead. Just kidding. Sorry. um, some people really identify with the Grateful Dead, though. It's true that some people it's died off quite a bit, but some people would wear like armbands and stuff and like follow them around, and I mean the following around and being part of like the Dead Army as they called them and stuff like that. I'm sure. I wonder if it's like a joke that George R. R. Martin thought about, with the Grateful Dead Army and the Dead, because obviously like you look at Grateful Dead albums and lyrics and stuff, and you can find a lot of things that are similar to Ice and Fire, but it might be a coincidence. So obviously, like the Weirwood is named after Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead. That's pretty established. Because why else are you getting this Weir? But I think then there are some other ones where you're like, okay, he has what's the one about faces? Steal Your Face. The Steal Your Face image. And you're like, okay, is Steal Your Face like Faceless Men, or is that just a coincidence? So at what point do you kind of say that the Grateful Dead army, the army of the dead, is that really a thing you thought about, or is that just a coincidence? Anyway, um, let's see. The Weirwood is a form of Weirdwood. I think it was Bob Weir for some reason. I mean, a lot of them have really like. There's a lot of random stuff in the story that just like comes from really weird, dumb places, like the Muppets. But like the Muppet stuff is some of the like even less cringy than like the Lannister words "Hear Me Roar" comes from like that song. I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar. And stuff like that. So Theon Greyjoy, better watch your speed. I like their song, My Dad Boned a Shara Dane. That would be a very great. Oh man, that's a good um uh, April Fool's kind of thing. If you did a theory video where you're like, well, if you open Grateful Dead lyrics, this one says like, drinking with the Shara Dane by the river, having moonshine with the daisies. You're like, what? I didn't know that this was all in a Grateful Dead album. Read the lyrics to Grateful Dead's Cassidy. All right. I've seen where the wolf has slept by the silver stream. I can tell you the mark he left, you were his dream. Ah, child of countless trees. Ah, child of boundless seas. Um, Blow the horn and tap the tambourine. Close the gap, the dark years in between. Um, Quick beats and an icy heart. Catch colt draws a coffin cart. Looking through any, you know, the thing is like the it's so easy to find stuff in literature about like wolves and stuff that it's overwhelming. Like, you know, you can take like we know that George wrote a story, and seven times never kill man, based on, you know, Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book. And like in the Jungle Book, there's like rules of the wolf, which is where and seven times never kill man comes from. Like it's the the poem. And so when you start talking about like the wolf, you start getting like these feelings, the laws of the jungle, as they say, you know. So like, you know, you start hearing these rules like the kill of the pack is the meat of the pack. You must eat where it lies. No man may carry away of the meat of his lair or he dies. The kill of the wolf is the meat of the wolf. And you start hearing these wolves like when the, you know, the call of the pack. He is judged by the council alone. And so when you read like Rudyard Kipling's poem about the whole thing, you can't help but think about like Ned Stark being like, yeah, when the lone wolf dies, the pack survives. And you can't help but think about Vermeer Sixskins and his like rules, you know, of being of being a skin changer. So, but we, you know, you can't throw every wolf reference in the world to be him. I mean, I'd probably say that the Kipling thing, Laws of the Jungle, is in George's mind, but I don't know if every wolf mention is there. Yes, Winter is Coming is from And Seven Gems Never Kill Man. The he means it as a it's spoken by by Dahan, the character that we use in the fanfic. But Dahan is trying to convince his leader, who's been receiving telepathic false messages from forest dwelling pyramids and creatures, that that he should perhaps stop thinking about war and start thinking about peace and settling down and saving food because winter is coming. What ended up being the Dorne opinion? Is it Spain? No, not really. It's more Oberyn has some connections to the poem El Cid, but it's for the most part not Spain at all. Like, it's not Spain at all. I mean, in the sense that it's warmer, that's about it. But historically, ethnically, religiously, like there's just nothing similar between Dorne and Spain. And I don't know why. It's like it's brought up just because like in the show they make everything very Dornish. But I mean, I guess there's oranges down there, lemons in Dorne, but there's lemons in Italy. There's lemons in southern Spain. I mean, it's silly. Red wine, there's red wine in Italy. So yes, Proctor Wyatt. Okay, so I'll do one last thing, and um, Dorne is more Middle East. George claims it's Palestine, um, and I think he means it in the sense that like when he talks about it being Wales and Palestine, what he's talking about is that like so the I didn't even mention this when I brought it up last time. The huge difference between Dorne and the rest of the and Spain is that the conquest of Dorne, the conquest of Spain was successful. Like they did defeat the Muslims and kick them out. The conquest of Spain was successful, while the conquest of Dorne was not. And so like you bring up like when Dorne is more about like Vietnam, or if we want to say the Crusades in Palestine, because you're talking about this like continuous feudal like fight against guerrilla warfare that you just cannot possibly ever win, and you can like try over and over, but you're eventually just going to lose, no matter what. And so it's in a sense like the futile war aspect of Dorne is more Vietnam, Palestine, and maybe I don't know, maybe Wales. I don't know much about Wales, but like in that sense. So like it's it's nothing. It's nothing in like Spain, because Spain was successful. they, they won. I mean, the Christians won, or however you want to frame it. Isabel and Ferdinand won. Anyway, thank you, Aggro. Thank you, Aggro. Dorne equals Italy. Could be. Dorne is Australian. Dorne. Aegon basically said, "Yeah, we defeated Dorne." Exactly. Yeah, it's getting late. All right, guys. Thank you so much. And I won't be on stream next week, but week after I'll be back. But I'll be in Thailand next week. So I will see you guys in 2 weeks. So talk to you guys soon.